Across the vast expanse of the Andromeda Spiral, there exists a truth that chills the hearts of even the most powerful alien empires. Humans don't just survive the impossible, they thrive in it. When the rest of the galaxy trembles at the mention of cosmic horrors, humans pack lunch and bring camping gear. They've turned their homeworld's deadliest predators into pets, transformed their most toxic plants into recreational beverages, and somehow convinced an entire species of sentient plasma beings to join their military as fun roommates. But what happens when the daughter of the galaxy's most feared conqueror, a princess who has witnessed the fall of star systems and the enslavement of entire species, finds herself genuinely terrified by a single human? Not because of his weapons, not because of his technology, but because of something far more disturbing, his kindness. This is the story of Princess Zarathal of the Vorthak Empire, whose father has crushed civilizations with a thought, and Marcus Chen, a human diplomat whose greatest weapon is his smile and whose most dangerous trait is his refusal to give up on people, even when those people happen to be the children of galactic tyrants. In a universe where fear is currency and cruelty is power, what happens when someone refuses to play by those rules? What happens when the most terrifying force in existence turns out to be hope itself? Welcome to a story where the real horror isn't what humans can destroy, it's what they can build. The throne room of Emperor Vorthak stretched across 3 city blocks, its obsidian walls carved with the death screams of 1,000 conquered worlds. Bioluminescent veins pulsed through the dark stone, feeding off the terror of those who dared approach the massive throne that dominated the chamber's center. The throne itself was hewn from the calcified remains of the last Zolonian high priest, and it radiated an aura of such malevolent power that most beings couldn't look directly at it without their sanity beginning to fray at the edges. Princess Zarathul stood at her father's right side, her chitinous exoskeleton gleaming like polished onyx in the chamber's eerie light. Her forearms hung loosely at her sides, each ending in razor-sharp talons that could slice through reinforced durasteel. Her elongated skull bore the ritual scarification of her royal lineage, and her 6 compound eyes tracked every movement in the vast space with predatory precision. At 23 cycles old, she had already witnessed the systematic destruction of 17 star systems, and had personally executed 42 planetary governors who had displeased her father. Fear was as natural to her as breathing. "The human delegation approaches, my lord," announced General Krekstar, his voice a rumbling bass that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. The general's massive frame was encased in biomechanical armor that had been grafted directly to his skeleton, making him more machine than organic being. Plasma conduits snaked across his form like glowing serpents, and his face was hidden behind a skull-like mask that had once belonged to a human marine he'd killed during the siege of Terra Minor. Emperor Vorthak didn't move from his throne, but the temperature in the chamber dropped several degrees as his attention shifted. The Emperor was ancient by any standard, his form having transcended the merely physical centuries ago. What remained was a writhing mass of dark energy barely contained within a vaguely humanoid shape, tendrils of shadow constantly reaching out to taste the fear of those around him. When he spoke, reality itself seemed to bend around his words. "Let them come," the Emperor intoned, his voice carrying harmonics that made lesser beings' bones vibrate painfully. "I am curious to see what manner of creature Earth sends to grovel before me." Princess Zarathul felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. She had heard stories of humans, of course. They were supposed to be one of the younger species, barely having achieved faster-than-light travel 3 centuries ago. According to intelligence reports, they were physically weak, short-lived, and had no natural weapons to speak of. They relied entirely on their crude technology and their ability to breed quickly. Her father had been planning to add Earth to his collection for decades, but the humans kept getting in the way of more pressing conquests. Today would finally see their surrender. The massive doors at the far end of the throne room ground open with a sound like breaking mountains. Through the entrance came a small procession that seemed almost anticlimactic after the buildup. At its head walked a human male of unremarkable appearance. He was of medium height by human standards, with dark hair that was beginning to show traces of gray at the temples and kind brown eyes that seemed completely out of place in the Emperor's court of horrors. He wore a simple black diplomatic uniform with minimal ornamentation, and he walked with an easy confidence that suggested he was either extremely brave or completely oblivious to the danger he was in. Behind the human followed two others of his species, a male and a female who were obviously bodyguards despite their formal attire. They moved with the fluid grace of trained killers, but they kept their hands conspicuously away from their weapons. The small group made their way across the vast expanse of the throne room, their footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. What struck Princess Zarathal as odd was that the human diplomat didn't seem afraid. Every other being who had entered this chamber had shown some sign of terror. Even seasoned warriors would tremble slightly or sweat despite their attempts to maintain composure. But this human walked towards certain death with the same casual air he might have used to attend a garden party. His heart rate, which she could detect with her enhanced senses, remained steady and calm. When the human delegation reached the prescribed stopping point 50 meters from the throne, they came to a halt. The diplomat stepped forward slightly and executed a perfect formal bow, neither too deep nor too shallow. When he straightened, he looked directly at Emperor Vorthak without flinching. "Your Imperial Majesty," the human said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite the acoustic dampeners that were designed to muffle speech. "I am Marcus Chen, Ambassador Plenipotentiary of the United Earth Federation. I come bearing greetings from President Morrison, and the hope that we might find a path to peaceful coexistence between our peoples." A ripple of dark amusement emanated from the Emperor's form. Several of the court officials actually took steps backward, recognizing the signs of their master's cruel mirth. When Vorthak was amused, someone was about to suffer in ways that would make seasoned torturers weep. "Peaceful coexistence," the Emperor repeated, savoring the words like fine wine. "How delightfully naive. Tell me, little human, do you know what happened to the last species that sought peaceful coexistence with me?" Ambassador Chen nodded calmly. "Yes, Your Majesty. I'm familiar with the fate of the Altarian Republic. I've also studied the campaigns against the Centauri Alliance, the Rigel Commonwealth, and 43 other civilizations that your forces have encountered over the past millennium. I've read the reports, examined the tactical analyses, and spoken with the survivors." The Emperor's amusement flickered, replaced by something that might have been surprise. "And yet you come before me with talk of peace? Do you think your species so special that it will be spared the fate of the others?" "Not special, Your Majesty," Chen replied. "Just different. We'd like to offer you something that none of the other species could." "And what?" the Emperor asked, genuine curiosity creeping into his voice. "Could you possibly offer me that I cannot simply take?" Marcus Chen smiled, and Princess Zarathul felt a strange chill run down her spine. It wasn't the predatory grin of a being preparing for violence or the desperate rictus of someone facing doom. It was warm and genuine, the kind of smile that suggested the person offering it actually cared about the well-being of the one receiving it. In this chamber of horrors, surrounded by instruments of torture and monuments to cruelty, that simple expression of human kindness was more alien than any bizarre anatomy or incomprehensible technology. "Friendship, Your Majesty," Chen said simply. "We'd like to be your friends." The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the ever-present hum of the throne room's biomechanical systems could be heard. General Krekstar's combat sensors were clearly malfunctioning, because they kept registering the human as a non-threat despite the fact that he had just said something so fundamentally disturbing that it defied comprehension. Emperor Vorthak leaned forward slightly, his form rippling with barely contained energy. "Did you just offer me friendship?" "Yes, sir." "We realize it might seem like an unusual proposition given the circumstances, but we believe that most conflicts arise from misunderstanding and fear. We'd like to learn about your people, your culture, your history. We think you might find our perspectives interesting as well. We're a young species, but we've had some unique experiences that might be valuable to share." Princess Zaratul found herself studying the human with growing fascination. Everything about him should have screamed weakness. He was small, physically unremarkable, and possessed no visible natural weapons or defenses. His species was known for being short-lived and fragile, and yet, standing in the presence of one of the most feared beings in the galaxy, he was offering friendship with the same casual sincerity someone might use to offer directions to a lost traveler. "You realize," the Emperor said slowly, "that I could destroy your entire species with a thought? That I have weapons that could turn your sun into a black hole? That I have commanded fleets that have scoured entire sectors clean of life?" "Yes, Your Majesty, I'm aware of your capabilities," Chen acknowledged. "And I have to say, that's part of what makes this so interesting from our perspective. Most of the powerful beings we've encountered have been so focused on demonstrating their strength that they've never really had the opportunity to explore what it means to use that strength constructively. We'd be fascinated to learn what someone with your resources could accomplish if you decided to build instead of destroy." The Emperor stared at the human for a long moment, and Princess Zarathul could feel her father's confusion radiating outward like heat from a forge. In over 2,000 years of existence, Emperor Vorthak had never encountered a response quite like this. Beings either cowered before him, raged against him, or tried to bargain with him. None had ever suggested that they wanted to be his friend or implied that his greatest accomplishments might lie in the future rather than the past. "You are either the bravest being I have ever encountered," the Emperor said finally, "or the most foolish." "Probably a little of both, Your Majesty," Chen admitted with a self-deprecating chuckle. "My wife tells me I have a tendency to see the best in people, sometimes to a fault. But I've found that most beings, regardless of their reputation, have something valuable to offer if you're willing to listen to them." "Your wife," Princess Zarathul said, speaking for the first time since the delegation's arrival. The words emerged before she could stop them, driven by a curiosity she couldn't quite explain. "You speak of her as if she matters to you." Chen's expression softened noticeably, and his smile became even more genuine. "She's everything to me, Your Highness. Sarah and I have been married for 20 years. She's a xenobiologist, actually, one of the best in her field. She was instrumental in establishing our first peaceful contact with the Sishan Collective. I wanted to bring her on this mission, but she's currently helping to establish a new research station in the Vega system." The casual way he spoke about his mate's accomplishments, the obvious pride in his voice, the complete absence of possessiveness or dominance, all of it was utterly alien to Princess Zarathul's experience. In Vorthak society, mating was about genetics, territory, and the accumulation of power. The idea that someone would choose a mate based on affection and respect, and then support their independent achievements was almost incomprehensible. "You allow your mate to work separately from you?" she asked, her compound eyes tracking his every micro-expression. "Allow?" Chen looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Sarah doesn't need my permission to do her work, Your Highness. She's brilliant and dedicated, and the research she does helps improve life for billions of beings across the galaxy. I'm incredibly proud of her, and I support her career in any way I can. That's what partners do for each other." Emperor Vorthak had been observing this exchange with growing interest. The humans' responses were unlike anything in his vast experience, and he was beginning to suspect that this species might be more complex than his intelligence reports had suggested. "Tell me, Ambassador Chen," the Emperor said, "what do you know of fear?" "I'm familiar with it, Your Majesty," Chen replied thoughtfully. "Fear is a natural response to perceived danger. It's kept our species alive for millions of years by helping us recognize and avoid threats. But we've also learned that fear, while useful for survival, can become destructive if we let it control our decisions. Some of our greatest achievements have come from choosing hope over fear, even when the safer option was to retreat. And what do you fear, little human?" Chen considered the question seriously before answering. "I fear failing the people who depend on me. I fear losing the people I love. I fear causing unnecessary suffering through my actions or inaction. But mostly, I fear the possibility that we might miss opportunities for connection and understanding because we're too afraid to take emotional risks. Princess Zaratul felt something twist uncomfortably in her thorax as she listened to his words. The human spoke of fear not as a weapon to be wielded or a weakness to be exploited, but as a normal part of existence that could be acknowledged and overcome. The idea that someone could choose to act against their fear out of compassion for others was so fundamentally foreign to her worldview that it made her feel slightly nauseous. "You came here despite your fears," she observed. "Yes, Your Highness. I came here because I believe that understanding between our peoples is more important than my personal safety. If there's even a small chance that we can find a way to coexist peacefully, then that possibility is worth the risk." The Emperor rose from his throne, a motion that sent waves of dark energy rippling through the chamber. When he stood, his form towered nearly 4 meters tall, and the temperature in the room dropped until frost began to form on the walls. "In over 2 millennia, the Emperor said, his voice carrying undertones that made the very air vibrate, no being has ever entered my presence and offered me friendship. No being has ever suggested that my greatest achievements might lie ahead of me rather than behind me. No being has ever spoken to me as if I were capable of creation rather than destruction." Chen nodded respectfully. "With respect, Your Majesty. Perhaps that's because no one has ever given you the opportunity to show them who you could be, rather than who you've had to be to survive." The words hung in the air like a challenge and an invitation rolled into one. Princess Zarathul found herself holding her breath, waiting to see whether her father would incinerate the human where he stood, or do something even more unpredictable. Instead, Emperor Vorthek did something that shocked everyone present, including himself. He laughed, not the cruel, mocking sound that usually preceded executions, but a genuine expression of surprise, and perhaps even delight. "You are indeed a fascinating creature, Marcus Chen of Earth," the Emperor said. "I am not accustomed to being surprised. It has been centuries since anyone has managed to present me with a perspective I had not previously considered." "I'm glad I could offer a new viewpoint, Your Majesty," Chen replied. "That's really all we're hoping for, an opportunity to share different ways of looking at the universe, and maybe learn from each other in the process." The Emperor began to pace, his movements sending small tremors through the massive chamber. Princess Zarathal could feel his excitement building, and it was unlike anything she had ever sensed from him before. Her father was genuinely intrigued, and for a being of his age and experience, intrigue was rarer and more precious than any material treasure. "Tell me more about these achievements of yours," the Emperor commanded. "What has your species accomplished that you think would interest me?" Chen's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "Oh, where do I even begin? We've developed some fascinating approaches to interspecies communication, for one thing. We've managed to establish meaningful dialogue with beings whose thought processes are completely alien to ours. We've learned to work with hive minds, collective consciousnesses, energy beings, even artificial intelligences that think in mathematical concepts rather than language." "Impressive," the Emperor acknowledged. "Continue." "We've also made significant advances in what we call rehabilitation science. We found that beings who have committed terrible acts often do so because of trauma, fear, or desperation. With proper support and understanding, many of them can become productive, positive members of society. We've successfully rehabilitated everyone from war criminals to beings that other species had written off as irredeemably evil." Princess Zaratul felt another uncomfortable twist in her thorax. The human spoke of rehabilitation and redemption as if they were normal, achievable goals, rather than naive fantasies. In her experience, beings were either predators or prey, conquerors or conquered. The idea that someone could fundamentally change their nature seemed impossible. "You believe that evil beings can become good?" she asked, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. Chen turned to address her directly, and she was startled by the gentle intensity of his gaze. "I believe that most beings are fundamentally good, Your Highness, but that circumstances can force them to do terrible things. Fear, pain, desperation, isolation, these can all drive good beings to make bad choices. But if we can address the underlying causes and provide support and understanding, most beings can find their way back to their better selves. And what of beings who choose evil not from desperation, but from desire? Emperor Vorthak asked, his voice carrying dangerous Those are harder cases, Chen admitted. But even then, I've found that cruelty often stems from a lack of genuine connection with others. When someone has never experienced authentic love or friendship, when they've never felt truly valued for who they are rather than what they can do, they sometimes try to fill that void with power or dominance. It doesn't work, of course, but it can take a long time for them to realize that. The Emperor stopped pacing and fixed his attention fully on the human diplomat. You speak as if you have personal experience with such beings. I do, Your Majesty. Before I became a diplomat, I worked as a counselor in our rehabilitation centers. I spent 20 years helping beings who had committed various crimes and atrocities find ways to rebuild their lives and reconnect with their communities. Some of my greatest successes were with individuals that other counselors had given up on. Give me an example, the Emperor demanded. Chen thought for a moment, then nodded. There was a being named Gorath, a member of a species called the Kethmori. He had been a war criminal responsible for the deaths of thousands of civilians during a territorial conflict. When he was captured, the prevailing opinion was that he should be executed immediately. But something about his case bothered me, so I requested permission to work with him. What bothered you? Princess Aratul found herself asking. He never tried to justify his actions, Chen explained. Most war criminals will make excuses or try to rationalize what they've done. But Gorath just sat in his cell and stared at the walls. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak, wouldn't interact with anyone. It wasn't defiance or stubbornness. It was like he had already died inside and was just waiting for his body to catch up. The Emperor leaned forward slightly. So what did you do? I sat with him, Chen said simply. Every day for 6 months I would go to his cell and just sit there. I didn't try to get him to talk or to make him eat. I just sat there so he wouldn't be alone. Eventually, he asked me why I was wasting my time on him. I told him that I didn't think it was a waste, that I thought he was worth saving, even if he didn't believe it himself. And that convinced him to change? Princess Zarathal asked skeptically. Oh no, Chen chuckled. It took another 1.5 years of daily conversations before he even began to open up about what had driven him to his crimes. Turned out his entire family had been killed in the early stages of the war, and he had convinced himself that if he could inflict enough pain on the enemy, somehow that would balance the scales. Of course, it never did. The more violence he committed, the emptier he felt. But he couldn't stop, because stopping would mean admitting that his family had died for nothing. How did you help him? The Emperor asked. And Princess Zarathul was surprised to hear what sounded like genuine curiosity in her father's voice. I helped him understand that his family's deaths weren't meaningless, but that meaning didn't have to come from vengeance. We worked together to create a memorial foundation in their honor, one that provided aid to war orphans regardless of which side of the conflict they came from. Gorath spent the rest of his life working for that foundation. With trust, Teddy, he saved more lives than he had taken, and he found a way to honor his family's memory through creation rather than destruction. The throne room was completely silent as the implications of Chen's story sank in. The human had taken a being that everyone else had written off as irredeemable and helped him find a way to transform his pain into purpose. It wasn't magic or advanced technology. It was simple patience, compassion, and the stubborn refusal to give up on someone's potential for good. Where is Gorath now? Emperor Vorthak asked quietly. He died of old age about 5 years ago, Chen said with obvious sadness. But the foundation he created is still running, and it's helped thousands of beings build better lives. At his funeral, former enemies from both sides of the war came to honor his memory. His transformation inspired others to seek rehabilitation, rather than simply accepting punishment. Princess Zarathul felt something she had never experienced before, a strange aching sensation in her chest that she couldn't identify. The human spoke of redemption and transformation, as if they were not only possible but inevitable, given enough time and care. He had taken a being consumed by hatred and helped him find love again. The very concept was so alien to her understanding of the universe that it made her feel dizzy. "You truly believe," the Emperor said slowly, "that any being can change?" "I believe that every being has the capacity for good, Your Majesty," Chen replied firmly. "I also believe that everyone deserves the chance to discover their better selves, no matter what they've done in the past. That doesn't mean ignoring or excusing harmful actions, but it does mean maintaining hope for the future." Emperor Vorthak was quiet for a long time, his form rippling with barely contained energy as he processed what he had heard. Finally, he spoke again. "You have given me much to consider, Marcus Chen of Earth," he said. "I will grant you and your delegation guest quarters in my palace. We will continue this conversation tomorrow." "Thank you, Your Majesty," Chen said, bowing again. "I look forward to learning more about you and your people." As the human delegation was escorted from the throne room, Princess Zarathal found herself unable to look away from the departing ambassador. Something about his presence had fundamentally unsettled her, but not in the way she was accustomed to being unsettled. This wasn't the fear of physical danger or the anxiety of political uncertainty. This was something deeper and more disturbing, a sense that everything she thought she knew about the universe might be wrong. When the throne room was empty except for the Emperor and his daughter, Vorthak turned to regard his heir with interest. "What did you think of our human visitor?" he asked. Princess Zaratul hesitated, struggling to put her complicated feelings into words. "I think," she said finally, "that he might be the most dangerous being we have ever encountered." Emperor Vorthak's laughter echoed through the chamber, but this time it carried no malice, only genuine amusement and perhaps a trace of pride. "Indeed, my daughter," he agreed. "Indeed, he might be." Princess Arathol stood at the observation deck of her private quarters, gazing out at the sprawling cityscape of Morkith, the capital of her father's empire. The city stretched across the continent like a vast cancer, its biomechanical towers reaching toward the blood-red sky like grasping talons. Rivers of molten metal flowed between the buildings, carrying the heat and energy that powered the Empire's war machine. In the distance, she could see the massive orbital elevators that connected the planet's surface to the fleet yards where her father's dreadnoughts were assembled. It was a sight that had filled her with pride for as long as she could remember, a testament to the power and reach of her family's dominion. Today, however, the view left her feeling strangely empty. The human diplomat's words kept echoing in her mind, disrupting her usual satisfaction with the Empire's achievements. For the first time in her life, she found herself wondering what the cityscape might look like if it had been built to nurture rather than to intimidate, to create rather than to consume. A soft chime indicated that someone was requesting entry to her quarters. She activated the wall scanner and was surprised to see that it was the human diplomat himself, standing calmly in the corridor outside her door. He had apparently convinced her guards to allow him to approach, which should have been impossible given the standing orders about unauthorized contact with prisoners. "Enter," she called, curiosity overcoming caution. Marcus Chen stepped into her quarters with the same easy confidence he had displayed in the throne room. He took a moment to examine his surroundings, and she watched his expression carefully for any sign of fear or revulsion. Her private chambers were decorated in the traditional Vorthak style, with bone sculptures depicting the conquest of various worlds, tapestries woven from the silk of extinct creatures, and furniture carved from the crystallized screams of defeated enemies. Chen's reaction was not what she had expected. Instead of horror or disgust, his face showed what appeared to be genuine interest and appreciation. "These are fascinating," he said, approaching one of the bone sculptures. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary. The way the artist has captured the moment of triumph while simultaneously preserving the dignity of the defeated, it's quite moving." Princess Zarathal blinked her compound eyes in confusion. "You find beauty in monuments to conquest?" "I find beauty in skilled artistry regardless of its subject matter," Chen replied. But more than that, I find this interesting because it suggests that whoever created this piece understood both victory and loss intimately. There's compassion here, hidden beneath the surface. The artist may have been celebrating conquest, but they also honored the courage of those who fought against impossible odds. She stared at the sculpture with new eyes, trying to see what the human saw. The piece depicted her great-grandfather's victory over the Zilonian fleet, with Vorthak warships triumphant above the burning remnants of their enemies. She had always seen it as a celebration of superior power, but now she noticed details she had overlooked before. The way the defeated ships were positioned, the care with which even their destruction had been rendered, there was indeed a strange sort of respect in the work. "Why did you come here?" she asked, unsettled by his ability to reframe her perceptions so easily. "I wanted to talk with you," Chen said simply. "Your father is fascinating, but I'm also interested in learning about the next generation of leadership. Besides, I got the impression that our conversation in the throne room raised some questions for you." Questions. She tried to inject skepticism into her voice, but it came out sounding more uncertain than dismissive. About redemption, about the possibility of change, about whether beings can choose to become something different than what they were created to be. Princess Zarathal felt her exoskeleton tighten defensively. The human was observant, perhaps dangerously so. "I am what I am," she said. "I am Vorthak. I am a predator. I am the heir to an empire built on strength and conquest. These things do not change." "Can I show you something?" Chen asked, pulling a small device from his pocket. "It's just a holographic projector, nothing dangerous." She nodded cautiously, and he activated the device. A three-dimensional image shimmered into existence in the center of the room, showing what appeared to be a garden. But this was unlike any garden she had ever seen. Instead of the carefully regimented displays of trophy plants that decorated her father's palace, this space seemed to grow wild and free. Flowers of every conceivable color bloomed alongside vegetables and fruits, while strange trees provided shade for benches where beings of different species sat together in apparent harmony. "This is the memorial garden that Gorath created." Chen explained, "The being I told you about yesterday. Each plant represents a life that was lost in the war, but instead of categorizing them by side or species, he mixed them all together. Enemies and allies, soldiers and civilians, adults and children, all growing side by side in the same soil." Princess Zarathul found herself drawn into the hologram, studying the impossible mixture of flora. How do they survive together? Different plants have different needs, different growth patterns. Some should choke out others. "That's the beautiful part," Chen said with obvious enthusiasm. Gorath spent years learning about botanical symbiosis. He discovered that many plants that seem incompatible actually benefit each other when properly arranged. The deep-rooted trees provide nutrients for the shallow-rooted flowers. The fruit plants attract pollinators that help the vegetables reproduce. The defensive plants protect the more vulnerable species from pests and harsh weather. It's a complete ecosystem, more resilient and productive than any monoculture could be. "You are saying that diversity makes them stronger?" "Exactly, and the same principle applies to communities, to societies, even to individuals. We become stronger when we learn to work with our differences rather than trying to eliminate them." The hologram shifted, showing different sections of the garden throughout various seasons. Princess Zarathul watched in fascination as the space transformed without losing its essential character. Plants that bloomed in spring gave way to summer growth, which yielded to autumn harvests and winter rest, but the underlying harmony remained constant. "This is what Gorath built instead of monuments to his victories?" she asked. "This is what he built to honor the memory of everyone who died, including his own family," Chen confirmed. But it became more than a memorial. It became a place where survivors from both sides of the conflict could come together to heal. They worked the garden cooperatively, sharing knowledge and resources. Children who were orphaned by the war are raised by adults from both communities. Former enemies have become friends, and some have even formed families together. Princess Zaratul felt that uncomfortable twisting sensation in her thorax again. The idea that former enemies could become friends, much less mates, challenged everything she had been taught about the fundamental nature of conflict. How is such a thing possible? How can beings forget the pain that was inflicted upon them? They don't forget, Chen said gently. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting or pretending that harm wasn't done. It's about choosing not to let that harm define your future. It's about recognizing that the person who hurt you may have been driven by their own pain, and that healing can only happen when the cycle of retaliation is broken. The human moved closer to the hologram, pointing to a section where several different species were working together to tend a complex arrangement of intertwined vines. See those beings there? The tall blue ones are Gorath's species, the Kethmori. The small green ones are Aldarians, their former enemies. Those children playing near the fountain are the offspring of mixed couples, beings who chose to create life together rather than continuing to destroy it. And Gorath? Did he find a mate among his former enemies? Chen smiled sadly. No, actually. Gorath never formed a romantic relationship with anyone. He said that his heart had been too badly damaged by grief and guilt to love in that way again. But he found other kinds of love. He became a father figure to dozens of war orphans. He mentored young beings who were struggling with their own anger and pain. He created a different kind of family, one based on choice and mutual care rather than genetic connections. Princess Zarathul studied the children in the hologram, noting how they played together without any apparent awareness of their species' differences. They seemed to see each other simply as playmates and friends, rather than as potential threats or conquests. They do not know they are supposed to be enemies. They know their history, Chen corrected. They're taught about the war and its causes. But they're also taught that they have the power to choose their own relationships and their own future. They understand that their parents' conflicts don't have to become their conflicts. The hologram flickered and changed again, showing an evening scene in the garden. Adult beings of various species sat around a fire pit, sharing food and stories while their children played nearby. The light from the flames illuminated faces that showed not just peace, but genuine joy and contentment. These were beings who had found happiness not through conquest or dominance, but through connection and mutual support. This troubles you, Chen observed, noting the tension in her posture. It confuses me, she admitted. I have been raised to believe that strength comes from dominance, that security comes from the ability to impose one's will upon others. But these beings appear to be strong and secure without dominating anyone. Different kind of strength, Chen agreed. Instead of the strength to destroy, they've developed the strength to create and nurture. Instead of the security that comes from making others afraid of you, they've found the security that comes from building relationships based on trust and mutual respect. Princess Zarathul deactivated the hologram with a gesture, suddenly overwhelmed by the implications of what she had seen. You are suggesting that my entire way of life is wrong. I'm suggesting that there might be other ways of living that you haven't been exposed to, Chen said carefully. I'm not here to judge your choices or your culture. I'm here to share different perspectives and see if we can find common ground. And if there is no common ground, if my father and I are truly as irredeemable as some believe, Chen was quiet for a moment, studying her with those unsettlingly kind eyes. Can I ask you a question, Your Highness? When you were young, before you learned about conquest and empire, what did you want to be when you grew up? The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her about her childhood desires in decades, and she had to search her memory to recall those early dreams. I wanted to be a builder, she said slowly, surprised by the words even as they left her mouth. I used to create elaborate structures with my construction toys, cities, and ships, and bridges. I would spend hours designing them, trying to make them as beautiful as they were functional. What happened to that dream? My tutors explained that building was the work of servants and slaves, she said, the rote answer coming automatically, that royalty commanded others to build, rather than building themselves. That my talents were better suited to conquest and administration. But you still enjoyed the creative process? Princess Arathel found herself nodding despite her better judgment. I did. There was something satisfying about taking raw materials and transforming them into something new and purposeful, but such pleasures were inappropriate for someone of my station. What if they weren't? Chen asked gently. What if being able to create was actually one of the highest forms of power? What if the ability to build something that improved lives and brought joy was more impressive than the ability to tear things down? The suggestion was so radical that it made her feel dizzy. In Vorthak society, creation was left to the servant castes, while the ruling class focused on acquisition and domination. The idea that she, as a princess, might not only be allowed but encouraged to build things with her own hands was almost incomprehensible. I could not, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I am a warrior, a conqueror. I am trained in combat and tactics and the administration of conquered territories. You're also intelligent, creative, and capable of learning new things, Chen pointed out. Those skills don't disappear just because you develop other skills as well, and honestly, the combination of strategic thinking and creative vision could be incredibly powerful if applied to constructive rather than destructive purposes. He activated his holographic projector again, but this time the image showed not Gorath's garden, but a vast engineering project. Princess Zarathul saw what appeared to be a damaged planet, its surface scarred by strip mining and toxic waste. As she watched, the image fast-forwarded through a process of transformation. Massive atmospheric processors cleaned the air, while autonomous systems began to repair the damaged ecosystem. New cities rose from the ruins, but these were unlike anything she had seen before. They seemed to grow organically from the landscape itself, incorporating living plants and flowing water into their design. This is the Kepler Restoration Project, Chen explained. A planet that had been completely strip-mined and left for dead. The original inhabitants had fled centuries ago, and everyone assumed the world was beyond saving. But a team of human engineers, working with specialists from 12 other species, spent 40 years bringing it back to life. This is real, she asked, studying the transformed landscape with growing fascination. Completely real. The planet now supports a population of over 2 billion beings from 47 different species. It's become one of the major cultural centers of our region of the galaxy, known for its universities and its artists' colonies. The original inhabitants not only returned but invited others to share their restored world. The images continued to cycle, showing different aspects of the restored planet. She saw universities where beings from dozens of species studied together, artists' workshops where impossible sculptures and paintings were being created through interspecies collaboration, and research facilities where scientists were developing new technologies for environmental restoration. How long did this transformation take? About 60 years from initial planning to the establishment of the first permanent settlements, Chen replied. The atmospheric restoration alone took 20 years, but the beings who worked on it said it was the most fulfilling project of their lives. They didn't just rebuild a planet, they created something entirely new and better than what had existed before. Princess Zarathul found herself imagining what it might feel like to be part of such a project, to take something broken and make it whole again, to see life flourishing where there had been only death and desolation. The idea filled her with an excitement she had never experienced before, a sense of possibility that was both thrilling and terrifying. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. "Because I think you have the potential to be part of something like this," Chen said. "You have intelligence, strategic thinking ability, and a creative instinct that's been suppressed but not eliminated. You also have access to resources that most beings can only dream of. Imagine what you could accomplish if you decided to use those gifts for creation rather than destruction." My father would never allow it, she said automatically, but even as she spoke the words, she realized she wasn't entirely sure they were true. Her father had seemed genuinely intrigued by the humans' perspectives. Perhaps he might be more open to change than she had assumed. Your father is a remarkable being, Chen said. Yesterday was the first time in my career as a diplomat that I've encountered someone with his level of power who was willing to listen to radically different ideas. I think you might be surprised by how he responds to alternative approaches. And if you are wrong, if he decides that your ideas are too dangerous to be allowed to spread, Chen shrugged with apparent unconcern. Then I'll have tried something worthwhile and failed. But I'd rather fail while attempting to build bridges than succeed while burning them down. Princess Zarathul stared at him in amazement. The human was essentially admitting that his mission might result in his death, and yet he seemed completely at peace with that possibility. His calm acceptance of risk in service of his ideals was unlike anything she had encountered in her experience with political figures, who typically prioritized their own safety above all other considerations. You truly do not fear death. I fear it, Chen admitted. I don't want to die. Especially not when Sarah is waiting for me at home. But I fear living a meaningless life more than I fear dying a meaningful death. And I've found that when you're willing to risk everything for something you believe in, you often discover that the risk was smaller than you thought. Because others are inspired by your courage, because courage is contagious, Chen confirmed. When people see someone else being brave, it reminds them that they can be brave too. And when enough people choose courage over fear, amazing things become possible. The conversation was interrupted by another soft chime, indicating a message from the Emperor. Princess Zarathul activated the communication panel and saw her father's image appear, his form crackling with suppressed energy. "Daughter," he said without preamble, "bring the human to the construction yards. I wish to show him something." The communication ended before she could respond, leaving her staring at the blank screen in confusion. In all her years, her father had never invited anyone to see the construction yards where his most advanced weapons were being developed. The invitation was unprecedented and potentially significant. "It appears my father wishes to continue your conversation," she told Chen. "I'm honored by his interest," Chen replied. "Would you be willing to accompany us?" "I'd value your perspective on whatever he wants to show me." Princess Zarathul found herself nodding before she had consciously decided to agree. The human's presence was becoming less unsettling and more intriguing with each interaction, and she was curious to see how her father would respond to Chen's continued challenges to their worldview. As they made their way through the palace corridors toward the transportation pods that would take them to the construction yards, Princess Zarathul found herself thinking about the garden hologram and the restored planet. For the first time in her adult life, she was imagining a future that involved building rather than conquering, creating rather than destroying. It was a terrifying prospect, but it was also undeniably exciting. And if a being like Gorath could transform himself from a destroyer into a creator, perhaps there was hope for her as well. The thought filled her with a mixture of anticipation and dread that was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Change, she was beginning to realize, was the most frightening and exhilarating possibility of all. The construction yards of the Vorthak Empire stretched across an entire moon, a vast complex of manufacturing facilities, testing ranges, and assembly bays where the most devastating weapons in known space were brought into existence. Princess Zarathul had visited the yards countless times throughout her life, but she had never seen them through the eyes of someone whose first instinct was to create rather than destroy. Walking beside Marcus Chen as their transport pod descended toward the primary facility, she found herself noticing details that had never seemed significant before. The yards were undeniably impressive from a technical standpoint. Massive gravitational manipulators held partially assembled dreadnoughts in perfect suspension, while swarms of construction drones worked with microscopic precision to install weapon systems that could crack moons in half. Energy conduits thick as starship hulls carried power from fusion reactors that burned hotter than most stars. The scale and complexity of the operation represented the pinnacle of Vorthak engineering achievement. But she also noticed, for the first time, how sterile and joyless the whole enterprise appeared. The worker drones moved with mechanical efficiency, but no apparent satisfaction in their tasks. The few organic supervisors she could see seemed focused entirely on quotas and deadlines, never pausing to appreciate the elegance of the designs they were implementing. Everything was optimized for maximum destructive output with no consideration for any other purpose. "Remarkable," Chen said as they disembarked from the transport pod, and Princess Zarathal felt a moment of surprise before she realized he was being genuinely appreciative rather than sarcastic. The engineering precision required for this kind of operation must be extraordinary. How do you coordinate the manufacturing of components across such a vast facility? Quantum-synchronized production matrices, she found herself answering. Each manufacturing unit receives constantly updated specifications that account for microscopic variations in material quality and ambient conditions. The entire operation is managed by a collective of 12 artificial intelligences working in parallel consciousness loops. "Fascinating," Chen said, studying the nearest assembly bay where a kilometer-long weapons platform was taking shape. The level of cooperation required between organic and artificial intelligence systems must create some interesting challenges. How do you handle disagreements between the AIs and their organic supervisors? The question caught Princess Zarathal off guard, because the honest answer was that such disagreements were not handled at all. The AIs were programmed to optimize for destruction and efficiency, while their organic supervisors were trained to implement their father's will without question. Conflict between the two was considered impossible by design. "There are no disagreements," she said, then paused as she realized how that must sound to someone from a species that seemed to thrive on diverse perspectives. "The AIs and organics are designed to want the same things." "Ah," Chen said, and she could hear the slight note of sadness in his voice. "That must make things very efficient, but I imagine it also limits the potential for innovation. Some of our best breakthroughs have come from creative tension between different viewpoints." Before she could respond, Emperor Vorthak materialized beside them in a swirl of dark energy that made the air itself seem to recoil. His presence was even more overwhelming in the open spaces of the construction yards than it had been in the throne room, and Princess Zarathul noticed that several of the nearby worker drones actually shut down temporarily rather than risk malfunctioning in response to his proximity. "Marcus Chen of Earth," the Emperor said, his voice causing harmonic vibrations in the metal structures around them. "Welcome to the heart of my military power. Here, the weapons that have conquered half the galaxy are born." "Thank you for the invitation, Your Majesty," Chen replied, showing no visible reaction to the Emperor's intimidating presence. "I'm honored that you're willing to share something this significant with me." Emperor Vorthak gestured toward the nearest assembly bay, where a massive stellar destructor was nearing completion. The weapon was a thing of terrible beauty, its crystalline focusing arrays gleaming like captured starlight, while its quantum field generators hummed with barely contained power. When completed, it would be capable of destabilizing a star's nuclear fusion processes, turning the heart of a solar system into a weapon against its own planets. This device, the Emperor said with obvious pride, can eliminate an entire star system in a matter of hours. No defense can stop it, no armor can withstand it. Entire civilizations have surrendered rather than face the threat of its deployment. Chen studied the weapon with the same careful attention he had given everything else he had encountered, and Princess Zarathal watched his face for signs of the fear or horror that such a demonstration usually induced. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like awe, but not the kind of awe that came from terror. It was the awe of someone recognizing exceptional craftsmanship, even if he didn't approve of its intended purpose. The precision required to destabilize stellar fusion processes without creating cascading gravitational effects must be incredible, Chen said thoughtfully. The mathematical modeling alone would require computational power on the order of simulating entire galactic clusters. How do you solve the quantum interference problems? Emperor Vorthak paused, clearly not expecting a question about technical specifications rather than a plea for mercy. Multi-phase resonance cascading, he answered after a moment. The targeting array analyzes the star's specific fusion characteristics and generates a matching harmonic frequency that disrupts the nuclear binding forces without creating gravitational shock waves. Brilliant, Chen said, and his admiration was clearly genuine. The amount of research and development that must have gone into perfecting that technique, it represents centuries of scientific advancement, doesn't it? Millennia, the Emperor confirmed, and Princess Zarthul could hear puzzlement creeping into his voice. You appreciate the technical achievement? Of course, Chen replied. This represents some of the most sophisticated physics and engineering I've ever encountered. The beings who developed this technology are clearly among the most brilliant scientists in the galaxy. I have tremendous respect for that level of intellectual achievement, even if I wish it were being applied to different purposes. The Emperor was silent for a long moment, studying the human with what might have been confusion or interest or both. You do not fear the weapon itself? I fear what it could do if used against innocent beings, Chen admitted. But the technology itself is just the application of natural principles. It's neither good nor evil inherently. It's simply a tool. What matters is how it's used and why. Princess Zarathal felt another of those uncomfortable shifts in her thinking as she listened to the exchange. She had always thought of their weapons as extensions of their power, symbols of their superiority over lesser beings. The idea that the technology itself was morally neutral, that its value lay entirely in how it was employed, had never occurred to her. If this technology were in your hands, Emperor Vorthak asked, what would you do with it? Chen considered the question seriously before answering. Honestly? I'd probably try to reverse engineer the principles to develop better stellar engineering techniques. The same technology that can destabilize a star could potentially be used to extend the life of dying stars or to safely trigger controlled fusion in gas giants to create new suns for colonization efforts. The Emperor stared at the human for what seemed like an eternity. You would use a weapon to create rather than destroy? I'd use the knowledge to create, Chen clarified. The specific configuration you have here is optimized for destruction, but the underlying physics could be reconfigured for constructive purposes. It's like the difference between using fire to burn down a forest versus using it to warm a home or cook a meal. Same basic force, completely different applications. Princess Zarathul found herself staring at the stellar destructor with new eyes, trying to imagine how its component systems might be reconfigured for the purposes Chen described. The quantum field generators that were designed to disrupt stellar fusion could theoretically be reversed to enhance it instead. The targeting arrays that located vulnerable points in a star's structure could be used to identify the optimal locations for introducing new fuel sources or stabilizing elements. Show me! Emperor Vorthak commanded suddenly, his form crackling with increased energy. Show me how you would convert this weapon into a tool of creation. Chen approached the stellar destructor without hesitation, studying its various components with obvious fascination. May I? He asked, gesturing toward a control interface. At the Emperor's nod, Chen activated the weapon's diagnostic systems, bringing up holographic displays that showed the internal structure and operating principles. Princess Zarathul moved closer, curious to see what the human would discover. Here, Chen said, highlighting the quantum field generators. These are calibrated to create destructive interference patterns in stellar fusion plasma. But if you reverse the phase alignment and adjusted the harmonic frequencies, you could create constructive interference instead. Rather than disrupting the fusion process, you'd be enhancing it. His hands moved across the interface with surprising skill, Calling up theoretical models and running preliminary calculations, the holographic displays began to show modified configurations, alternative targeting parameters, and completely different operational protocols. The targeting system could be reprogrammed to identify dying stars or unstable stellar systems, he continued, growing more excited as he worked. Instead of looking for vulnerabilities to exploit, it would scan for opportunities to provide assistance. A star that's running low on hydrogen fuel could have its core density optimized to burn more efficiently. A binary system where one star is siphoning material from its companion could have its gravitational balance corrected. Emperor Vorthak moved closer to observe the calculations, and Princess Zarathul could feel her father's surprise and growing interest. The modified configurations Chen was proposing weren't just theoretically possible. They were elegant and efficient. In some cases, they actually represented improvements over the original destructive applications. The power requirements for constructive applications are actually lower than for destructive ones, Chen noted, pointing to the energy consumption projections. Creating order requires less force than creating chaos. You could operate multiple stellar engineering projects simultaneously with the same power that one stellar destructor would consume. And the range? The Emperor asked. Potentially much greater, Chen replied, pulling up additional calculations. Destructive applications require precise targeting to avoid collateral damage, which limits your effective range, but constructive applications are much more forgiving. Even if your modifications aren't perfectly calibrated, the worst that happens is that the enhancement is less efficient than optimal. You're not going to accidentally destroy something you meant to help. Princess Zarathul watched in fascination as the holographic displays continued to evolve, showing systems and applications that had never occurred to her. The same technology that had been used to conquer worlds could be used to make those worlds more habitable. The weapons that had brought terror to the galaxy could become tools for spreading prosperity and hope. "Why are you showing us this?" she asked, voicing the question that had been building in her mind. If these modifications are possible, if the technology could be used constructively, why are you giving us the knowledge? Why not keep it secret and develop it yourselves? Chen turned to face her, and once again she was struck by the warmth and sincerity in his expression. "Because knowledge grows when it's shared," he said simply. "The best discoveries happen when brilliant minds work together rather than in isolation. Your people have developed technologies that are centuries ahead of ours. In some areas, we have insights and perspectives that might complement your technical capabilities. By combining our knowledge, we could achieve things that neither of us could accomplish alone." "You trust us not to misuse this information?" Emperor Vorthak asked, and Princess Aruthal could hear genuine curiosity in his voice. "I trust that you're intelligent enough to recognize the benefits of constructive applications," Chen replied. "I also trust that beings who are capable of creating something as sophisticated as this stellar destructor are capable of creating things that make life better rather than worse. The question isn't whether you can, it's whether you want to." The Emperor was quiet for a long time, his attention focused on the modified schematics that Chen had created. Finally, he gestured toward a different section of the construction yards, where a smaller but equally impressive project was nearing completion. "Come," he said, "I want to show you something else." They followed him to an assembly bay where a sleek, predatory-looking vessel was taking shape. Unlike the massive dreadnoughts being built in other areas of the facility, this ship was clearly designed for speed and stealth rather than brute force. Its hull was composed of some kind of adaptive metamaterial that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, and its weapons systems were integrated so seamlessly into its structure that they were nearly invisible. "This is my personal flagship," Emperor Vorthak explained. "The most advanced vessel my empire has ever produced. It incorporates technologies that have taken millennia to perfect." Chen studied the ship with obvious admiration. "It's beautiful," he said, and Princess Zarathul could hear that he meant it. "The integration of form and function is extraordinary. This isn't just a weapon, it's a work of art. It is also capable of destroying entire fleets single-handedly," the Emperor noted. I don't doubt it, Chen agreed. But that's not what makes it remarkable. What makes it remarkable is the level of innovation and creativity that went into its design. Someone didn't just build a bigger, more powerful version of existing technology. They completely reimagined what a starship could be. Emperor Vorthak turned to face the human directly. You see something in my creations that even I had not fully recognized, he said slowly. You see the artistry and innovation alongside the destructive capability. I see the work of minds that refuse to accept limitations, Chen replied. Beings who looked at the universe and said, we can do better than this. That's the same impulse that drives all great achievements, whether they're weapons or gardens, whether they're built to destroy or to nurture. Princess Sarathel found herself looking at her father's flagship with new understanding. She had always seen it as the ultimate expression of military power, but Chen was right about the artistry involved. Every line of the ship's design served both functional and aesthetic purposes. It was a creation that revealed the designer's passion for excellence and beauty as much as their desire for tactical advantage. "Father," she said suddenly, the words emerging before she could think them through, "what if we built something like this, but designed it for exploration instead of conquest? What if we created ships that were just as advanced and beautiful but meant to discover new worlds rather than conquer them?" In all her years, she had never questioned the military applications of their technology. Her suggestion represented a fundamental shift in thinking that he had not expected. "Exploration?" he repeated. "Think about it," she said, growing more excited as the possibilities opened up in her mind. "We have the most advanced starship technology in the galaxy. We could build vessels capable of traveling to distant galaxies, of surviving in hostile environments that no other species could endure. We could discover new worlds, new life forms, new scientific principles. We could be the first to see things that no being has ever seen before." Shen smiled at her enthusiasm, and she felt a warm glow of approval that was unlike anything she had experienced before. "That's a wonderful idea, Your Highness." Exploration and discovery could be just as challenging and rewarding as conquest, but the rewards would last much longer. Military victories eventually become historical footnotes, but scientific discoveries benefit everyone forever. Emperor Vorthak studied both the human and his daughter for a long moment. "You believe that creation is more satisfying than destruction? I believe that creation builds on itself," Chen replied. "When you destroy something, that's the end of the story. But when you create something, that becomes the beginning of new stories." Gorath's garden led to new communities forming. The Kepler Restoration Project led to new technologies and new forms of interspecies cooperation. Every act of creation opens up possibilities that didn't exist before. "And what would you create?" the Emperor asked. "If you had access to our resources and technology?" Chen's eyes lit up with excitement. "Oh, there are so many possibilities. We could develop new techniques for terraforming hostile worlds. We could create mobile habitats that could support entire civilizations during long-distance migrations. We could build research stations in the heart of supernovas to study physics under extreme conditions. We could establish communication networks that would allow instant contact between distant galaxies." As he spoke, Chen gestured toward different areas of the construction yards, clearly imagining how the existing facilities could be adapted for these alternative purposes. Princess Sarathel found herself caught up in his enthusiasm, visualizing the projects he described and adding her own ideas to the mix. "What about biological preservation?" she suggested. "We could create seed ships that would carry the genetic templates of entire ecosystems to new worlds. If a species' home planet were threatened by natural disasters, we could evacuate not just the beings themselves, but their entire biosphere." "Brilliant," Chen agreed. "And we could establish genetic libraries in stable systems, preserving the biological diversity of the galaxy for future generations. Even if individual worlds were lost, the knowledge and genetic material would survive." Emperor Vorthak listened to this exchange with growing fascination. His daughter had never shown this level of passion for any project before, and the human's enthusiasm was genuinely infectious. For the first time in centuries, he found himself imagining applications for his empire's capabilities that didn't involve domination or destruction. These projects, he said slowly, they would require cooperation between species. The best ones always do, Chen confirmed. Every species has unique insights and capabilities. Humans are good at adaptation and problem-solving under pressure. Your people are clearly masters of advanced technology and strategic thinking. The Cetians excel at biological engineering. The Aldarians are unmatched at mathematical modeling. When we combine our strengths, we can accomplish things that no single species could manage alone. And if conflicts arise between species working on the same project, then you work through them, Chen said simply. Conflict isn't necessarily a bad thing if it leads to better solutions. Some of our most successful collaborative projects have involved heated debates and disagreements that ultimately resulted in breakthroughs that no one had anticipated. Princess Zara Tool found herself imagining working alongside beings from other species, combining their different perspectives and capabilities to achieve goals that none of them could reach alone. It was a radically different vision of interspecies relationships than the one she had grown up with, but it was also undeniably appealing. Father, she said, turning to address the Emperor directly, could we try it? Could we take some of our resources and create something instead of destroying something? Just to see what it feels like. Emperor Vorthak stared at his daughter for a long moment, then at the human who had somehow inspired her to ask such a question. Finally, he turned his attention back to the stellar destructor, still glowing with potential in its assembly bay. Perhaps, he said slowly, we could start with something small. The project began as little more than an intellectual exercise. Emperor Vorthak had authorized the conversion of one minor assembly bay for what he termed experimental applications of constructive technology. Princess Zarathal had thrown herself into the work with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone, including herself. What had started as a simple modification to one of their smaller stellar engineering platforms had evolved into something far more ambitious and transformative. 6 weeks after Marcus Chen's first visit to the construction yards, the experimental bay hummed with activity unlike anything the facility had ever seen before. Instead of the usual mechanical efficiency of weapon production, there was an energy of creative collaboration that seemed to infect everyone who entered the space. Vorthak engineers worked alongside human scientists, sharing theoretical frameworks and challenging each other's assumptions. The AI systems that normally optimized for destruction had been reprogrammed to optimize for creation, and the results were producing innovations that neither species had anticipated. Princess Zarathul stood at the central command station coordinating the work of dozens of teams as they integrated their various contributions into a coherent whole. She had discovered that managing a creative project required skills she had never developed during her military training. Instead of imposing her will through authority and fear, she had to inspire cooperation through shared vision and mutual respect. It was far more challenging than commanding through intimidation, but it was also infinitely more satisfying. The biological integration systems are showing promising results, reported Dr. Gate. Sarah Chen, Marcus's wife, who had arrived 2 weeks earlier as part of an expanded human delegation. The xenobiologist had proven to be every bit as brilliant as her husband had suggested, and her expertise in adaptive ecosystems had been crucial to the project's success. The symbiotic relationships we've established between the Vorthak biomechanical systems and the human organic components are exceeding all our projections. Princess Zarathal nodded, studying the holographic displays that showed the project's current status. What they were building was unlike anything that had ever been attempted before, a mobile ecosystem restoration platform that could adapt to the specific needs of any damaged environment. It combined Vorthak engineering excellence with human innovation and biological insights from 3 other species that had joined the collaboration. The power coupling efficiency is up another 7%, added Chief Engineer Vorgath. The massive Vorthak had initially been skeptical of working with beings he considered inferior, but his attitude had changed dramatically once he realized what they could accomplish together. The human gravity manipulation techniques are far more elegant than our original approaches, because we think about it differently, explained Dr. James Morrison, the human physicist who had developed the new gravity systems. You've been using gravitational fields as tools for control and destruction. We've been using them for exploration and transportation. Different goals lead to different solutions. Princess Zarathal watched the easy collaboration between beings who should have been enemies and felt a sense of wonder that never seemed to diminish. The project had become a living demonstration of everything Marcus Chen had talked about during his first visit. Beings from different species with different capabilities and perspectives were creating something together that none of them could have achieved alone. Your Highness, called out Zektran, one of the Aldarian mathematicians who had been instrumental in solving the computational challenges of the project, we're ready for the first full-scale integration test. She moved to the observation deck that overlooked the main assembly area, where their creation was taking its final shape. The restoration platform was beautiful in a way that none of their weapons had ever been. Its biomechanical systems flowed together with organic grace, while its technological components were integrated so seamlessly that it was difficult to tell where engineering ended and biology began. The entire structure seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, like a living heart made of metal and crystal and growing tissue. "It's magnificent," said a familiar voice beside her. Princess Zarathul turned to see her father materializing on the observation deck, his energy form crackling with what she had learned to recognize as excitement rather than anger. "Father!" she said, surprised by his appearance. Emperor Vorthak had been observing the project from a distance, offering resources and support but avoiding direct involvement. His presence here suggested that something significant was about to happen. "I wanted to witness this moment personally," he explained. "The first test of our first creation. It seems appropriate that I should be present." Marcus Chen joined them on the observation deck, along with the other project leaders. The human diplomat looked tired but exhilarated, his enthusiasm for the work undiminished, despite the long hours and technical challenges they had faced. "Are you ready to see what we've built together, Your Majesty?" he asked. "I am indeed," the Emperor replied, and Princess Zarathul could hear genuine anticipation in his voice. The test began with the activation of the platform's sensory systems. Arrays of sophisticated scanners came online, each one calibrated to detect different types of environmental damage and biological distress. The displays around the observation deck lit up with data streams as the platform began to analyze its immediate surroundings, learning the characteristics of the construction facility's artificial environment. "Sensory integration is nominal," reported Dr. Chen, monitoring the biological components. "The living sensors are adapting to the local conditions and providing detailed ecosystem analysis. Computational systems are functioning within optimal parameters," added Zektran. "The integration between organic and artificial intelligence is proceeding smoothly." Princess Zarathul watched the data streams with growing excitement. The platform was not just functional, it was elegant. The way its various systems worked together reminded her of watching a master artist at work, each component contributing to a harmonious whole that was greater than the sum of its parts. Beginning Phase 2 announced Chief Engineer Vorgath, deploying restoration protocols. The platform's main systems came online with a subtle shift in its energy patterns. Biomechanical appendages extended from its central core, each one equipped with specialized tools for different aspects of environmental repair. Some were designed to neutralize toxins and pollutants, others to introduce beneficial microorganisms and nutrients. Still others would plant and nurture new vegetation, creating the foundation for renewed ecosystems. "The remarkable thing," Marcus Chen observed, "is how smoothly everything is working together. We've got technology from 5 different species integrated into one platform, and there are no compatibility issues at all, because we designed it together," Princess Zarathul replied, understanding something fundamental for the first time. When beings work together from the beginning, when they share their knowledge and learn from each other, Their contributions naturally complement one another. It's only when we try to force incompatible systems together that we run into problems. Emperor Vorthek turned to study his daughter with interest. You have learned something from this project. I've learned that creation requires a different kind of strength than destruction, she said thoughtfully. Destroying something requires force and determination, but creating something requires patience, cooperation, and the willingness to adapt when things don't work as expected. It's more challenging in some ways, but also more rewarding. How so? When?